foul. Don't you dare shout at me!
Don't you dare shout at me. 6 words. That's all it took to change everything. It's 3:12 in the morning. Seoul Metropolitan Hospital, Treatment Room 4. A woman in wrinkled navy scrubs, 29 hours into a double shift, running on burnt coffee and sheer stubbornness, stands pointing at a man in an expensive suit. She has no idea who he is. She doesn't know that his name makes Seoul's most powerful men lower their eyes, that the tattoos curling up his neck tell stories written in violence, that he's built an empire on the simple understanding that defiance means death, that the men standing behind him have ended lives for far less disrespect than she's showing right now. She just knows 3 things. He's bleeding. He's her patient. And he will not raise his voice in her emergency room. Don't you dare shout at me! 6 words spoken by someone powerless to someone who had made empires crumble with a single phone call. 6 words that should have been her death sentence. But here's the thing about impossible moments. Sometimes they don't end the way they're supposed to. Sometimes an exhausted nurse tells a monster not to shout. And sometimes that monster listens. This is the story of Sophia Gibson and the man whose world she shattered with a single sentence. A collision between healing hands and blood-stained power. Between a woman who crossed an ocean to escape her grief and a man who'd never learned what it meant to feel anything at all. This is a love story that should never have happened. And that's exactly why it did. Before we continue, subscribe right now, not later, now. Because in 40 minutes, Sung-jae will have a complete file on Sophia's life. In 1 week, he'll walk into a parking garage and show exactly what happens to people who threaten what's his. And if you're not subscribed, you'll scroll past and miss everything. Don't be that person who comes back 3 months later wishing they'd followed this story from the beginning. Hit subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. This story is about to get dangerous, impossible, and absolutely unforgettable. Now, let's see what happened after those 6 words changed everything. The call came at 3:47 a.m., and Sophia knew before Nurse Choi even spoke that something was different. 29 hours into her double shift, she'd developed a 6th sense for trouble. The younger nurse approached the station with careful steps, like someone crossing a frozen lake, unsure of the ice. Treatment Room 4, Choi said quietly. Dr. Park wants you. Sophia looked up from her charting, reading the tension in her colleague's shoulders. What's the injury? Hand laceration. But Choi glanced toward the hallway, then back. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. Josimhae, be careful with this one. In 18 months at Seoul Metropolitan Hospital, Sophia had learned to trust Nurse Choi's instincts. The woman had worked emergency medicine for 15 years, had seen everything from gang violence to industrial accidents without breaking stride. Whatever waited in Treatment Room 4 had rattled her. Sophia gathered her supplies: suture kit, lidocaine, irrigation solution, sterile gloves, and made her way down the corridor. The ER had achieved its early morning lull. That strange quiet between the drunk driving accidents and the heart attacks that always seemed to strike at dawn. Her sneakers squeaked softly against linoleum that had been mopped so many times the pattern had worn away. Through the small window in the door of Treatment Room 4, she saw him. He sat motionless on the examination table, his stillness so complete it seemed almost rehearsed. Expensive dark suit, crisp white shirt now decorated with blood. One hand rested in his lap, wrapped in what looked like silk. A handkerchief, she realized, completely soaked through. His other hand lay perfectly relaxed against his thigh, fingers long and elegant, like a pianist's. But it was his face, that made her pause. Sharp cheekbones, a jaw cut from stone, dark hair swept back from a high forehead. Handsome in that severe way that suggested suffering had carved away anything soft. And his eyes, black as midnight, watching the door with an awareness that made the hair on her arms rise. She'd seen 1,000 pairs of eyes in emergency rooms, eyes wide with shock, clouded with pain, bright with fear. These eyes held none of that. They assessed. They calculated. They missed nothing. Sophia pushed through the door. "I'm Nurse Gibson. I need to see your hand." He didn't move. Didn't offer the injured hand. Just studied her with that unnerving stillness, like a cat deciding whether something was worth its attention. "Your hand," she repeated, setting her supplies down with deliberate precision. "The bleeding one. You're American." His English was perfect, almost unnervingly so. His voice reminded her of expensive whiskey, smooth but with an edge that could cut. "And you're bleeding on hospital property. Hand, now, please." Something flickered across his features. Amusement, maybe, or surprise. He unwrapped the silk handkerchief slowly, revealing a deep gash across his right palm. The cut was too clean, too precise to be accidental. Someone had done this deliberately, and he'd allowed it. Sophia snapped on her gloves and stepped closer, ignoring every instinct that told her to maintain distance. She'd learned something in all her years of nursing. Fear was a luxury she couldn't afford, not when someone needed help. She took his hand, surprisingly warm, and angled it toward the overhead light. The laceration was deep, but clean. No obvious tendon damage. Lucky. Or perhaps he'd known exactly how to position his hand. "This needs sutures," she said matter-of-factly. "I'll irrigate it first, then numb the area. It's going to hurt before it gets better." "Everything hurts, Nurse Gibson." The way he said her name felt too intimate, like he was testing how it sounded. "The question is whether we acknowledge pain or pretend it doesn't exist." She met his gaze directly. At 63, she'd earned the right to look anyone in the eye. "I acknowledge it by offering lidocaine, unless you're committed to the martyr approach." "Do what you need to do." She worked with the efficiency of someone who'd sutured hundreds of wounds, thousands probably, over 4 decades of nursing. First in Chicago, where she'd started fresh out of school. Then here, half a world away, running from memories she couldn't quite escape. As she irrigated the wound, she watched his face. Most patients flinched, gasped, swore. He gave her nothing, not even a tightening around his eyes. Just that same eerie calm, as if pain was something that happened to other people. She prepared the lidocaine injection, aware of his gaze on her face, studying her, taking her measure. "You're not afraid," he observed. "Should I be?" "Most people are." "I'm tired, not stupid." She injected the anesthetic, finally drawing the smallest reaction, a barely perceptible tension in his jaw. "I can tell you're not someone I'd want to meet in a dark alley. But right now, you're just another patient who needs stitches. What you do outside these walls isn't my concern." She threaded the curved needle, beginning the first suture with steady hands. Outside the door, she could sense the staff hovering, everyone suddenly busy with tasks that kept them near treatment room 4, everyone pretending not to watch through the glass. The silence stretched between them, thick and weighted. She focused on her work, each stitch precise and even, the way she'd been taught all those years ago by a crusty old surgeon who'd believed in doing things right the first time. "Your colleague warned you about me," he said quietly. Not a question. He'd heard Nurse Choi's whispered caution. "She worries." "With good reason," Sophia tied off another stitch. She was doing fine, maintaining her professional distance, treating him like any other patient. But something in his tone, that subtle condescension, that assumption he knew better than she did about danger, struck a nerve. She'd been awake too long, felt too much, lost too much. And suddenly, she was done. She looked up from her work, meeting those black eyes. Let me be clear. I've been on my feet for 29 hours. I held a grandmother's hand while she died, waiting for her family. I did chest compressions on a 6-year-old who found his mother's pills. I've seen more blood and grief than you can imagine, so no, I'm not afraid of you. I'm just tired. And if you're going to sit in my ER, you'll let me do my job without the intimidation routine. She saw his lips part, saw something sharp gathering in his expression, the beginning of words that would probably end her. Don't you dare shout at me. The words came out hard and clear. 6 words that should have been a death sentence. 6 words she'd regret as soon as her exhaustion wore off. But something extraordinary happened. He went absolutely still, stiller than before, if that was possible. The sharp thing in his eyes transformed into something else. Something like wonder, as if she'd performed an impossible magic trick. Sophia returned to her suturing, her heart hammering against her ribs but her hands steady as rock. 40 years of nursing had taught her that much. How to keep working even when the ground shifted beneath her feet. She finished the last stitch in absolute silence, bandaged his hand with professional efficiency, and gave him wound care instructions he probably wouldn't follow. When she finally met his, Sungjai didn't sleep after leaving the hospital. Sleep had become optional years ago, just another weakness he'd trained himself to overcome. Instead, he sat in his study overlooking the Han River, his bandaged hand resting on the chair arm, and watched dawn break over Seoul. 6 words. Don't you dare shout at me. He'd replayed them 100 times, testing them from different angles, like a jeweler examining a stone for flaws. What haunted him wasn't the words themselves, but the way she'd said them. Not with bravado or recklessness, but with the bone-deep exhaustion of someone who'd simply run out of tolerance for nonsense. She'd looked at him and seen just another difficult patient at the end of a long shift. It was the most extraordinary thing anyone had done in a decade. At precisely 7 a.m., Min-ho arrived with coffee and morning reports. His right-hand man was a study in controlled efficiency. Early 40s, steel-gray suit, wire-rimmed glasses that made him look more accountant than enforcer. Which was, of course, the point. The Daegu situation is resolved, Min-ho said, setting down a folder. Park made his choice poorly. Sungjai nodded absently. Park's betrayal had required last night's object lesson. The hand wound a calculated sacrifice, deep enough to make the point, but not enough to matter. The man's body was already at the bottom of the Han. All of it felt distant now, unimportant. I need you to find someone, Sungjai said. Min-ho's posture shifted slightly. In 15 years, Sungjai had never asked him to investigate anyone for personal reasons. Her name is Gibson, American nurse at Seoul Metropolitan Hospital. I want to know everything. What specifically? Everything, Sungjai repeated. Why she's in Korea, where she came from, what made her into someone who doesn't understand fear. Min-ho's pen poised over his notebook. Time frame? 24 hours. Now Min-ho did look up. 24 hours meant priority alpha, the timeline reserved for immediate threats. She's not a threat, Sungjai said. She's a curiosity. The dangerous kind? Sungjai flexed his bandaged hand. The unpredictable kind. By the following evening, Minho returned with a thick folder. They met in the same study, city lights flickering on below like fallen stars. Sophia Margaret Gibson, Minho began. Age 43, born Chicago. Father died when she was 12. Construction accident. Mother worked 3 jobs to keep Sophia and her younger brother fed. He flipped a page. Nursing degree from Northwestern, top of her class. Could have worked anywhere. Instead chose County General, one of the most understaffed, underfunded hospitals in Chicago. Why? She told colleagues it's where she was needed most. Minho's tone suggested he found this reasoning foreign. Worked there 18 years. Built a reputation as one of their best trauma nurses. Requested double shifts, covered holidays. By all accounts, she lived for the job. Until 3 years ago. Minho's voice softened. Her brother, Daniel Gibson, age 28. Motorcycle accident. Brought to County General's ER with internal bleeding and collapsed lung. Sungjae waited. Sophia wasn't working that night. Arrived within 20 minutes of the call. The ER was overwhelmed. They were short-staffed. Daniel waited 47 minutes before a doctor could see him. By then he was hemorrhaging internally. Died in surgery 3 hours later. The silence felt heavy to her. The hospital investigation found systematic failures, inadequate staffing, outdated equipment, missed protocols. Daniel's death was ruled preventable. They settled out of court. And Sophia? Took leave that became resignation. Traveled for 6 months. Thailand, Vietnam, Japan. Applied to Seoul Metropolitan 18 months ago. Works the same brutal hours she did in Chicago, as if she's trying to save enough people to make up for the one she couldn't. Minho closed the folder. Her colleagues say she's brilliant but distant. Doesn't socialize, doesn't date, lives alone in Mapogu. She exists between her apartment and the hospital. That's her entire world. Sungjae absorbed this, assembling the pieces. A woman who'd dedicated her life to healing, only to watch her brother die because a system failed him. Who'd fled halfway around the world but brought her grief with her. Someone who knew about loss, about the particular hell of being unable to save the person who mattered most. One more thing, Minho said carefully. According to the nurses, she never talks about her past. Never mentions family. She showed up in Seoul like she'd been born there yesterday. They respect her work, but nobody really knows her. She's hiding, Sungjae said quietly. Or protecting herself. Minho paused. Sir, if I may, why the interest? She's a nurse, an outsider. This isn't you. Sungjae looked at his bandaged hand, remembering the steadiness of her fingers, the way she'd met his eyes without flinching, the exhaustion in her voice when she'd told him not to shout. She looked at me and saw just another patient, he said slowly, not a threat. Not an opportunity, not someone to fear or flatter, just another person who needed help. And that's significant because no one has looked at me that way in 20 years. Minho was quiet, understanding dawning. What do you want me to do with this information? Sungjae stood, walking to the window. Below, Seoul pulsed with life, millions of people unaware that high above the city, something had shifted. Nothing. File it. And Minho, no one else sees this. Of course. After Minho left, Sungjae remained at the window, holding the folder. Inside were photographs. Sophia leaving the hospital, buying groceries, sitting alone at a cafe with a book. In every image, she looked contained, controlled, separate from the world. He recognized that distance. He'd perfected it himself. Two people who'd learned that feeling nothing was safer than feeling everything. Two people who'd built walls so high they'd forgotten what it was like to let someone in. The parking garage at 4 in the morning should have been safe. Sophia had made this walk 100 times, her sensible shoes echoing against concrete, her scrubs still carrying the antiseptic smell of the ER. She was thinking about her bed, about whether her brother would have been proud of the nurse she'd become, or disappointed in the woman who'd run to Seoul to escape his memory. She didn't hear him until he was already too close. "Hey, nurse lady." The voice was slurred, expensive, the kind of drunk that came from bottles most people couldn't afford. Sophia turned, keys already positioned between her fingers the way she'd been taught decades ago. He was young, maybe 30, wearing a suit that probably cost more than her monthly salary. Handsome in that polished way of someone who'd never been told no. His tie was loosened, eyes glassy with whatever he'd been drinking. "I need a doctor," he said, stumbling. "You're a nurse. You'll do." "The emergency entrance is that way." Sophia kept her voice level, pointing toward the ramp. "Check in at triage." "I don't wait in lines." He moved closer. She caught the scent of expensive whiskey and entitled rage. "Do you know who I am? My father owns—" "I don't care if your father owns the moon. The ER is that way. I'm off shift." She turned toward her car. That was her mistake. His hand closed around her upper arm, fingers digging hard enough to bruise. "I'm talking to you. Let go of my arm." Her voice was steel. Instead, he yanked her back toward him. "You don't walk away from me. Do you know who my family is? I could have you deported. I could—" He never finished. One moment he was gripping her arm. The next, he was slammed against the concrete pillar, moved so fast Sophia barely registered the motion. A hand, elegant, long-fingered, with fresh sutures across the palm, pressed against the drunk man's throat. Not choking, just holding. A promise. Sung-jae had appeared from nowhere, materializing from shadows like violence made flesh. He wore a different suit this time, charcoal gray, perfectly tailored. His face was absolutely calm. That's what frightened her most. Not anger, just surgical precision that suggested he'd done this 1,000 times before. "She told you to let go," Sung-jae said quietly. His voice was conversational, almost pleasant. Somehow that made it worse. The young man's eyes went wide. Even drunk, he recognized something in Sung-jae's face. Something that spoke directly to his primitive brain about predators and prey. I was just— You put your hands on her." Sung-jae tilted his head slightly. "Do you know what happens to men who do that?" "I'm sorry, I didn't know she was—" The man's voice cracked. "My father is Chairman Park Industries. Your father will receive a phone call tomorrow explaining his son needs treatment for alcoholism before something regrettable happens. You'll check into a facility, a quiet one, 6 months, and you'll never come within 100 meters of this hospital again." "You can't tell me." The hand at his throat shifted slightly. The young man went silent. "Can't I? Call your father right now. Tell him Sung-jae is making a suggestion. See what he says." Recognition flashed across the drunk man's face. The name meant something. Something that cut through privilege and every safety net he'd ever known. "I'll go," he whispered. "Right now." "Yes, you will." Sung-jae released him. The man stumbled toward the exit with desperate speed, expensive shoes slapping concrete. They watched him disappear into pre-dawn darkness. Then Sung-jae turned to Sophia. "Are you hurt?" She looked at her arm where fingerprints were already darkening into bruises. Looked back at this man who'd appeared from nowhere, who'd defended her with casual violence that should have terrified her. Should have. But didn't. Not quite. I had it handled, she said, hearing the shake in her voice. I'm sure you did. His dark eyes scanned her face, reading things she didn't want him to see. But now you don't have to. Why are you here? The question came out sharp. 4 a.m, in a hospital parking garage. That's not coincidence. Something flickered in his expression. Acknowledgement, maybe, or respect. No, he agreed, it's not. Are you following me? Protecting you. He said it simply, as if there was no difference. Anger cut through her exhaustion. I don't need protection. I don't need some... She gestured at him, at his perfect suit and dangerous hands. Whatever you are, deciding I need a bodyguard. What I am, Sungjay said quietly, is someone who ensures men who hurt women face consequences. What you need is irrelevant to what you deserve. The words hung between them in the fluorescent-lit garage. Sophia wanted to argue, wanted to tell him to leave her alone, wanted to maintain professional distance. But her arm ached, and she was so tired, and this dangerous man had just made a problem disappear with terrifying efficiency. Your hand, she said finally, nodding toward his sutured palm. You shouldn't use it like that. You'll tear the stitches. His lips curved into something that might have been a smile. Then perhaps you'll need to repair them again. That's not how medicine works. No, he agreed. But it's how we work. There was no we, Sophia wanted to say. There couldn't be. But standing in that parking garage at 4 a.m, watching dawn gray the sky beyond concrete walls, she couldn't make herself say the words. Instead, she walked to her car. He watched her go, a dark sentinel in expensive wool, and she knew without looking back that he'd stay until she drove away. Protecting what he'd decided was his to protect, whether she wanted him to or not. Sophia started with Google, sitting in her tiny apartment with a cup of coffee going cold beside her laptop. She told herself it was simple curiosity, the kind of innocent research anyone would do after a strange encounter. But her hands shook slightly as she typed his name into the search bar, and she knew she was lying to herself. Sungjay. Just the first name, because that's all she had. The results loaded. Her stomach dropped. The first article was from the Korea Herald, 3 years old. A photograph showed him at some charity gala, impeccable in a tuxedo, standing beside the mayor. The caption identified him as prominent businessman and philanthropist. The article praised his donations to children's hospitals, his support for orphanages throughout Seoul. He looked different in the photo, younger, or perhaps just less dangerous. But those eyes were the same. Dark and calculating, even in a smile staged for cameras. She scrolled deeper. The next few articles followed the same pattern. Charity events, business acquisitions, a new luxury hotel opening in Gangnam. All very respectable, very legitimate, the kind of man who appeared in the society pages. But then the tone shifted. A blog post from an investigative journalist, quickly taken down but preserved in internet archives. It mentioned Sungjay's name in connection with the Songpa territory, with shipping companies that allegedly moved more than just cargo, with construction projects that destroyed entire neighborhoods overnight. The post ended abruptly, mid-sentence, as if the writer had been interrupted or silenced. Sophia's coffee sat forgotten, completely cold now. She kept searching. A news article about a nightclub fire in Itaewon. 23 people dead. The owner, when questioned, had whispered a name before his lawyer arrived. The reporter noted it was a name that cannot be printed for legal reasons. But in the comments section, before they were disabled, someone had written simply, Everyone knows who really owned that club. Another article. A prosecutor found dead in his apartment, ruled a suicide despite the suspicious circumstances. He'd been building a case against organized crime in Seoul. His files had disappeared. His colleagues refused to be interviewed. She clicked on a discussion forum, the kind where expatriates traded information about living in Korea. Someone had asked innocuously about safe neighborhoods. The responses were normal until someone mentioned Songpa. "That's his territory," one commenter wrote. "You'll be safe there. He doesn't allow petty crime, but don't ask questions." "Who?" the original poster had asked. The response came 12 hours later, as if the commenter had needed time to decide whether to answer. "If you don't know, you're lucky. Keep it that way." Sophia sat back, her heart hammering. She thought about the parking garage, the way that drunk heir's face had changed when Sung-jae said his name. The instant recognition. The terror. She thought about Nurse Choi's warning. "Be careful." Her phone buzzed. A text from her colleague, Ji-won, from the pediatric unit. "Coffee tomorrow? Need to talk to you about something." Sophia agreed, grateful for the distraction, and spent a restless night dreaming of dark eyes and dangerous hands. The next afternoon, Ji-won arrived at the cafe looking nervous. She was young, 27, with the kind of earnest optimism Sophia had lost somewhere in her 40s. She ordered her coffee and sat down, not quite meeting Sophia's eyes. "I heard something," Ji-won said quietly, switching to English even though they were alone in the corner booth. "About you. And him." Sophia's chest tightened. "What did you hear?" "That he was in the parking garage. That he—" Ji-won glanced around, lowered her voice further. "That he hurt someone for you." "He didn't hurt anyone. He just intervened." "Sophia." Ji-won leaned forward, her face serious in a way Sophia had never seen. "Do you know who he is? Really?" "I'm starting to understand." "No, I don't think you do." Ji-won pulled out her phone, scrolled through Korean news sites, keeping the screen tilted away from other patrons. "My cousin is a police officer. He says Sung-jae controls everything south of the river. Shipping, construction, nightclubs, protection. The police can't touch him because he's too connected, too careful. They've been trying to build a case for years, but witnesses disappear. Evidence vanishes. He seemed civilized. So do lions in a zoo, until they're not." Ji-won's hand covered Sophia's. "People who get close to him end up in two categories: protected or destroyed. There's no middle ground." Sophia thought about the way he'd looked at her in treatment room 4. The way he'd appeared in the parking garage like a guardian angel made of violence. The way he'd said, "What you need is irrelevant to what you deserve." "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because you're American. You don't understand how things work here. You don't understand that some men—" Ji-won struggled for the words. "Some men are not meant to be saved. Some men are exactly what they appear to be, no matter how they make you feel." After Ji-won left, Sophia sat in the cafe for another hour, watching Seoul move past the window. Students heading to Hagwons, office workers rushing home. Normal people living normal lives, unaware of or choosing not to see the darker currents flowing beneath the city's bright surface. She thought about Chicago, about why she'd really left, about the ways people could hurt you even after they were gone, about the difference between running away and running toward something. Her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. The message was simple. "Your arm? Is it healing properly?" She stared at the text for a long moment. She should block the number. Should report him to whom? The police who couldn't touch him? Hospital security who'd looked away when he'd walked into treatment room 4? Instead, she typed, "The bruises will fade." His response came immediately. "Some marks run deeper than bruises." Sophia closed her eyes. He wasn't wrong. She'd been running from marks that ran bone deep for 18 months, crossing an ocean to escape what couldn't be escaped. She deleted his number without responding. But she didn't block it. And sitting in that cafe, watching Seoul's neon signs flicker to life in the growing darkness, Sophia understood that something had already shifted. Some door had opened that she couldn't quite close, no matter how sensible it would be to try. The first donation appeared on a Tuesday morning, announced during the weekly staff meeting with barely concealed excitement by the hospital administrator. 500 million won to the Pediatric Oncology Fund. Anonymous. The only marking, the initials SJ on the bank transfer. Sophia sat in the back of the conference room, half listening while she updated patient charts on her tablet. Generous donations weren't uncommon. Seoul's wealthy often gave to hospitals for tax purposes or social prestige. She thought nothing of it. Until the orchids arrived. They appeared at the nurses' station on Thursday, delivered by a man in an expensive suit who wouldn't meet anyone's eye. 6 stems of Paphiopedilum rothschildianum in a simple ceramic pot. Lady slipper orchids so rare that Sophia had only seen them once before, in a botanical garden in Chicago, where her brother had dragged her on a middle school field trip. "Someone's got an admirer," Nurse Choi said, reading the card. Her smile faded. "It just says SG, no sender name." Sophia stared at the orchids. Each bloom was extraordinary. Burgundy stripes on pale petals, complex and almost architectural in their beauty. These weren't flowers you picked up at a corner shop. These were flowers that required knowledge, intention, money. "They're probably for Dr. Song," she said, turning back to her work. "She has the same initials." But Dr. Song hadn't ordered any orchids. And when a second donation appeared the following week, this time 700 million won to the hospital's general fund, again marked only SJ, Sophia felt something cold settle in her stomach. The parking garage, the sutured hand, the dark eyes that had watched her drive away. "It's not him," she told herself firmly, watering the orchids that no one had claimed but that somehow remained at the nurses' station, positioned where she'd see them every time she charted. "It's coincidence." But the donations kept coming. Always unmarked except for those 2 initials, always substantial, and always to departments Sophia had mentioned in passing. The pediatric fund, after she'd told a story about a child who couldn't afford treatment. The cardiology research program after she'd complained about outdated equipment. The third week brought another orchid, Dendrobium kingianum, delicate pink blooms that smelled like honey and sunshine. The card said nothing at all this time. Nurse Choi raised an eyebrow. "These are for you. You know that, right?" "I don't know anything," Sophia said, more sharply than she intended. "SG, Sophia Gibson, SJ." Choi lowered her voice, glancing around the station. "Everyone knows who that is. Everyone knows he was here. Everyone saw how he looked at you." "He looked at me like I was a nurse doing her job." "He looked at you," Choi said quietly, "like you were the only thing in the room worth seeing. And now he's sending flowers. Expensive flowers. The kind that mean something." Sophia wanted to argue. Wanted to throw the orchids away, refuse the implications, maintain the careful distance she'd built around her heart like a fortress. But the flowers were so beautiful, And it had been so long since anyone had given her anything that wasn't practical or expected or tinged with pity. She thought of her brother, who used to bring her dandelions from the park, calling them wishes, who'd died in an overcrowded ER while nurses too tired and understaffed moved too slowly to save him, who'd wanted her to be happy, not just useful. The fourth week brought Phalaenopsis schilleriana, moth orchids in pale pink, their blooms like wings caught mid-flight. The card this time had a single line in precise handwriting. Some things deserve to be protected, even if they don't ask for it. Sophia stood at the nurse's station, holding the card, feeling her carefully constructed walls develop hairline cracks. "You should call him," Nurse Choi said gently. "Thank him, at least." "I don't have his number." "You have his flowers, and his donations just paid for the new pediatric CT scanner you've been saying we needed for 6 months." Choi touched one of the moth orchid blooms carefully. "He's listening to you, even when you don't think anyone is." That night, Sophia found herself researching orchid meanings like a teenager with a crush she wouldn't admit to having. Paphiopedilum, rare beauty. Dendrobium, wisdom and elegance. Phalaenopsis, love and refinement. She told herself it meant nothing, that a man who lived in shadows and violence couldn't possibly be sending her coded messages in flowers, that she was being ridiculous, reading romance into what was probably guilt or obligation or some strange form of payment for stitching his hand. But when the 5th orchid arrived, Cattleya, vibrant purple, the card reading simply, "You still see me as human. No one else does." Sophia sat down at the empty nurse's station at 3 in the morning and let herself cry for the first time since she'd arrived in Seoul. Not because she was sad, because something in her carefully controlled heart had started to thaw, and she wasn't sure if that was the most dangerous thing that had ever happened to her, or the only real thing she'd felt in years. The donations kept coming. The orchids kept arriving. And Sophia stopped pretending she didn't look for them, didn't count the days between deliveries, didn't catch herself wondering what a man who lived in darkness knew about flowers that bloomed in light. Dr. Kang had been performing surgery longer than Sophia had been nursing, and he never let anyone forget it. Especially not the American nurse who'd had the audacity to question his post-op orders in front of the residents. It happened during morning rounds, the entire surgical team trailing behind Dr. Kang, like ducklings following their mother. Sophia had been updating the chart for a 68-year-old woman recovering from an emergency appendectomy when she noticed the medication dosage, too high for someone with compromised kidney function. A simple mistake, easily corrected. She'd approached quietly, professionally. "Dr. Kang, Mrs. Huang's creatinine levels are elevated. Perhaps we should adjust the—" He'd turned on her like a viper. "Perhaps," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You should remember that I am the surgeon and you are the nurse. I don't recall asking for your opinion, Miss Gibson." The hallway had gone silent. Residents stared at their shoes. Other nurses suddenly found reasons to be elsewhere. Sophia had felt her face flush, but she'd stood her ground. "With respect, Dr. Kang, the dosage could cause—" "With respect?" He'd laughed, short and sharp. "You come to my country, work in my hospital, and presume to tell me how to practice medicine? In America, perhaps nurses play doctor. Here, we understand hierarchy. We understand our place." He'd walked away, leaving her standing there with her clipboard and her fury, the other nurses offering sympathetic looks, but no words. No one contradicted Dr. Kang. No one dared. Sophia had adjusted the medication order anyway, documenting her concerns in the chart. Mrs. Huang's kidneys were more important than Dr. Kang's ego. But the humiliation had settled into her bones, the familiar weight of being dismissed, being made small, being told her experience didn't matter. She'd survived it. She always did. 3 days later, everything changed. Dr. Kang arrived for his usual morning rounds looking like he'd aged a decade overnight. His hands trembled slightly as he reviewed charts. His voice, usually booming with authority, came out subdued. And when he reached Mrs. Huang's room, he paused at the nurse's station where Sophia was working. "Nurse Gibson." His voice was careful, almost gentle. "I reviewed Mrs. Huang's chart. Your adjustment to her medication was appropriate. Thank you for your vigilance." Sophia looked up, startled. Dr. Kang didn't thank nurses. Dr. Kang barely acknowledged nurses existed. "Of course, doctor," she said slowly. "In the future," he continued, and she could see the effort it took him to form the words, "I would appreciate your clinical observations. Your experience is valuable." Then he'd walked away, leaving Sophia staring after him in confusion. Nurse Choi appeared at her elbow. "What happened?" "I have no idea." But she did. Somewhere in the back of her mind, in the place that had been trying very hard not to think about dark suits and dangerous hands, she knew exactly what had happened. She found out for certain during her lunch break when Nurse Park, who knew everything that happened in the hospital, pulled her aside in the cafeteria. "You didn't hear this from me," Park whispered, glancing around like she was sharing state secrets. "But Dr. Kang was seen in the parking garage yesterday, level B3, with a man in a very expensive suit." Sophia's stomach dropped. "What man?" "No one knows his name. But security said Dr. Kang went down looking arrogant and came back up looking like he'd seen a ghost. And since then," Park raised her eyebrows meaningfully, "he's been very different, very polite, especially to you." Sophia sat there holding her rice ball, feeling anger build in her chest like pressure in a kettle. She knew where to find him. Somehow, she just knew. The hospital rooftop was technically off-limits, but the lock had been broken for months. She pushed through the door at sunset, the Seoul skyline spreading before her in layers of concrete and neon. Sung-jae stood at the edge, his back to her, hands in his pockets, looking out over the city like a king surveying his kingdom. "What did you do?" Her voice cut through the evening air. He turned slowly, unsurprised. "Good evening, Nurse Gibson." "What did you do to Dr. Kang?" "I had a conversation with him." "What kind of conversation leaves a man terrified?" "An honest one." Sung-jae's face was calm, unrepentant. "I explained that certain behaviors, humiliating dedicated professionals, for instance, are unacceptable." "You had no right." Sophia walked toward him, her hands clenched. "I don't need you fighting my battles. I don't need you threatening people on my behalf." "He disrespected you." "People disrespect me all the time. That's life. That's working in a hospital. That's being a woman in medicine." Her voice rose. "You can't just threaten everyone who's rude to me." "Can't I?" He tilted his head, genuinely curious. "No, because I'm not yours to protect. I'm not some damsel who needs rescuing. I've been taking care of myself for 63 years and I'll keep doing it without your intervention." Sung-jae was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the fading light. "Dr. Kang was wrong," he said finally. "Not just rude. Wrong. He diminished you in front of others to hide his own inadequacy. That's not something you should have to tolerate. That's my choice to make. And if he'd dismissed your medical judgment and Mrs. Huang had suffered, would that still be acceptable?" The question hit harder than she wanted to admit. Because he was right. Dr. Kang's ego could have hurt a patient, had probably hurt patients before. You scared him, Sophia said quietly. Yes. Badly. Yes. What exactly did you say? Sungjae's expression didn't change. I suggested he consider how fragile reputations can be, how quickly a respected surgeon can become known for complications, how accidents happen in hospitals, how important it is to work with competent nurses who catch potentially fatal errors. You threatened his career. I illuminated consequences. He stepped closer. He needed to understand that you are under my protection, whether you want it or not. There it was again, that absolute certainty, that assumption of ownership that should have enraged her, should have. I can't have you doing this, she said, but her voice had lost its edge. I can't stop, he replied simply. They stood there on the rooftop, the city breathing below them, the gap between their worlds as wide as ever, but somehow feeling smaller in the twilight. Your hand, Sophia said finally, nodding toward the sutured palm. How's it healing? His lips curved. Come closer and see for yourself. She didn't, but she didn't walk away either. And they both knew what that meant. The invitation came as a single text message at 5:43 a.m. Rooftop, please. Sophia stared at the unknown number, knowing exactly who it was. She'd deleted his contact information 3 times in the past 2 weeks, as if that could erase the fact that Sung-jae had woven himself into the fabric of her carefully controlled life. The orchids that appeared at the nurse's station, the anonymous donation to the pediatric fund, the way Dr. Kang had suddenly become painfully polite after years of condescension. She should ignore the message, should finish her shift, go home, pour that glass of wine, and forget about men with dangerous hands and eyes that saw too much. Instead, she found herself climbing the emergency stairwell to the roof access, her heart beating harder than the 5 flights warranted. He stood at the edge of the helipad, silhouetted against the dawn sky. Seoul sprawled below them, the city just beginning to wake, lights flickering on in apartment windows like stars coming to life. He didn't turn when she approached, but she knew he'd heard her. He heard everything. This is against hospital policy, she said. Unauthorized roof access. I excel at breaking rules. He glanced at her then, and something in his expression was different, stripped of the armor he usually wore. Thank you for coming. Sophia moved to stand beside him, keeping careful distance between them. The morning air was cool, carrying the scent of distant rain. Why am I here? Because I need to tell you something true. He was quiet for a moment. And lies are easier in the dark. She waited. Below them, an ambulance arrived, its lights painting the street in urgent reds and blues. I was 7, he said finally, when my mother left me at the Busan orphanage. She said she'd come back. Said she just needed a few days to find work. His voice was matter-of-fact, reporting facts about a stranger. I waited by the window every day for 2 years before I understood she wasn't coming. Sophia felt something crack in her chest. She knew this story. Not his version, but the shape of it. Abandonment, the particular cruelty of hope. The other children learned quickly, he continued. The ones who cried got beaten. The ones who showed weakness got worse. So I stopped feeling anything at all, became very good at it. He turned to face her fully, until a nurse told me not to dare shout at her. Sung-jae, your turn, he said gently. Fair exchange. I've shown you my scar. Show me yours. Sophia looked out at the city, at the hospital below where she'd spent 18 months running from a conversation she'd never had. My brother was 12. I was 22, just out of nursing school. He had an asthma attack at school. The ambulance took him to County General, overcrowded, understaffed, underfunded. Her voice remained steady through years of practice. He waited 4 hours in the ER. 4 hours, gasping, turning blue, while nurses who were too overwhelmed and doctors who were too tired kept saying, "Soon, soon." By the time someone finally saw him, his brain had been without oxygen too long. She felt Sungjae's attention on her, patient and complete. I held his hand while the machines kept his heart beating, made the decision to let him go because our mother couldn't. The words came easier than she'd expected, maybe because Dawn made confessions feel temporary. I became a nurse to save people, but I couldn't save the one person who mattered. "So you came here," Sungjae said quietly. "Half a world away, where every patient you save is penance. And you built an empire," she countered, "where no one can ever abandon you because they're too afraid to leave." The truth hung between them, sharp and clean. "We're quite a pair," he said after a moment. "Two people who survived by becoming unreachable." "Is that what we are? A pair?" He moved closer then, not touching, but near enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "I don't know what we are. I only know that when I'm near you, I feel things I spent 30 years learning not to feel. It's terrifying." Sophia looked up at him, at this man who controlled half of Seoul's underworld, who could destroy lives with a phone call, who'd just confessed to being terrified. "I came to Korea to stop feeling, to bury myself in work until the grief stopped." "Did it work?" "No." She smiled, sad and honest. "And then you walked into treatment room 4 and made it worse." "Worse? You made me feel again. I hate you for that." "I know." His hand moved toward her face, hesitated. "May I?" She nodded. His fingers touched her cheek, impossibly gentle from someone capable of such violence. "We're both very damaged," she whispered. "Yes," he agreed. "But perhaps we're damaged in complementary ways. Perhaps two people who learned to survive alone might learn something different together." The sun broke over the horizon, flooding the rooftop with golden light. Below them, the hospital came to life, the eternal rhythm of healing and hurting, living and dying. "This is impossible," Sophia said. "Most worthwhile things are." She should walk away, should go back to her safe, controlled, emotionally sterile life. Instead, she leaned into his touch and let herself imagine what impossible might look like. Just for a moment. Just until the sun finished rising. The rooftop helipad had become their place, though neither had said so aloud. Sophia found him there at midnight, standing at the edge where the safety railing met empty air, Seoul spreading below him like a circuit board of light. He didn't turn when she approached, but she knew he'd heard her. He always heard her. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. "You texted me to come." "I texted you to say goodbye." The words hit her chest like a fist. Sophia moved closer, close enough to see the tension in his shoulders, the careful control in how he held himself, like a man trying not to shatter. "What happened?" Kim noticed. He said it simply, as if those two words explained everything. Maybe they did. "My oldest rival. The one who's been waiting 20 years for me to show weakness." He finally turned to face her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "You're my weakness, Sophia." "I didn't ask to be." "No, you didn't ask for any of this." He moved toward her, each step deliberate. "You asked to be left alone to do your job. to save lives. To honor your brother's memory by being everything the system failed to be for him. And instead you got me. The bitterness in his voice was new. Raw. What did Kim do? He sent flowers to the hospital. To you. White chrysanthemums. Sungjae's jaw tightened. In Korea, those are funeral flowers. A message. He's telling me he knows exactly how to hurt me now. Sophia felt cold despite the mild night. He's threatening me to get to you. He's threatening you because I was stupid enough to let him see what you mean to me. Sungjae reached for her hand, his fingers, those elegant, dangerous fingers, gentle against her wrist. This is what my world does, Sophia. It finds the thing you love most and uses it as a weapon. So what are you saying? That we stop? Pretend we don't? She couldn't finish, couldn't say the word that had been building between them for months. I'm saying this is against nature and logic. His thumb traced small circles on her pulse point. You heal, I destroy. You save lives. I've taken them. You represent everything good in this world, and I'm human, she interrupted. You're human. Flawed and damaged and trying, which is more than most people manage. I've killed people, Sophia. He said it flat, without inflection. Not in self-defense, not in the heat of the moment. Calculated decisions. Do you understand what that makes me? She did. God help her. She did. And she was standing here anyway. I understand you're giving me a choice, she said. Walk away now, before it gets worse. Before Kim or someone like him decides the best way to hurt you is to put me in the ground. She met his dark eyes. That's what you're offering, isn't it? A way out before the danger becomes inescapable. Yes. And if I don't take it? Something cracked in his careful control. Then I'll do everything in my power to protect you. Everything. And that will mean more violence, more blood, more of the things that make you look at me like you're trying to reconcile the man who brings you orchids with the monster who breaks bones in parking garages. I've already reconciled it, Sophia said. You're both. You've always been both. That doesn't frighten you? It terrifies me. She stepped closer, close enough to feel the heat of him. But walking away terrifies me more. I spent 3 years after my brother died going through motions, Sophia shaped but hollow. You make me feel things again. Anger and fear and... She stopped, the word catching in her throat. And? His voice was barely a whisper. And whatever this is, this impossible, illogical thing that shouldn't exist but does anyway. Sungjae closed his eyes, and for a moment he looked almost fragile. If you stay, people will try to hurt me. This isn't theoretical, Sophia. Kim will come. Others will come. And I'll have to... I know what you'll have to do. She touched his face, felt him lean into her palm like a man starving for gentleness. I'm choosing to stay anyway. I'm choosing you anyway. Why? The question sounded torn from somewhere deep. Because you're choosing to be better. Because you asked me to walk away instead of trapping me. Because you see the danger and you're trying to protect me from it, even from yourself. She smiled, sad and certain. Because I'm 63 years old, and I know exactly how rare it is to find someone who makes you feel alive. He pulled her close then, his arms wrapped around her like she was something precious he might lose. She felt his heart hammering against her cheek, felt the tremor in his breath. I can't promise you safety, he murmured into her hair. I'm not asking for promises, I'm asking for truth. The truth is this will probably end badly. Maybe, Sophia agreed. But at least we'll have had it. Whatever it is. Above them, the Seoul sky glowed orange with light pollution, and below, the city hummed with life and danger and possibility. They stood together on that rooftop, two broken people who'd found something neither believed they deserved, choosing each other despite every logical reason not to. Choosing hope over safety. Choosing together over alone. Even knowing the cost might be everything. The bomb never made it past the hospital's service entrance, but it came close enough. Close enough that Sophia heard the controlled detonation 2 hours later, felt the rumble through the floor tiles of the ICU, where she'd been evacuated along with 3 critical patients and a pharmacy tech who wouldn't stop shaking. Close enough that when Sung-jae appeared in the doorway, suit jacket gone, white shirt untucked, a cut above his eyebrow still bleeding, she understood with terrible clarity that loving him meant living in the crosshairs of men who wanted him dead. "Out!" he said to the 2 guards flanking him. Not a request. They hesitated. Sung-jae's gaze cut to them, and they left. The door closed. Silence settled between them like fallout. "You need stitches," Sophia said, because focusing on wounds was easier than confronting what had almost happened. What could still happen tomorrow, next week, every day she stayed in his orbit. "I need you safe." His voice was raw in a way she'd never heard. "I need you on a plane to anywhere that isn't here." "Is that what you want?" "What I want?" He stopped, jaw clenching. "What I want doesn't matter. They came for you, Sophia. They'll come again." She'd known this moment was inevitable from that first night in treatment room 4, when she'd looked into those dark eyes and seen a man who carried violence like other people carried briefcases. She'd known it on the hospital rooftop at dawn when he'd told her about the Busan orphanage, about learning that the world rewarded strength and punished softness. She'd known it every time he appeared in her life like a dark miracle, solving problems with methods she couldn't condone and couldn't quite condemn. "They came for me because of you," she said quietly. "But I'm still here because of me. You don't understand what you're choosing." "Don't I?" Sophia moved closer, close enough to see the muscle jumping in his jaw, the way his hands clenched at his sides like he was physically restraining himself from reaching for her. "I'm 63 years old, Sung-jae. I've buried my baby brother. I've held dying patients who had no one else. I crossed an ocean to escape grief and brought it with me anyway. Don't tell me I don't understand darkness." "This is different." "Yes, it is." She reached up, fingertips grazing the cut above his eyebrow. He flinched like her touch burned. "Because for the first time since Danny died, I feel something other than numb. You scare me. The world you live in terrifies me, but the thought of getting on that plane, of being safe and alone," her voice cracked, "that terrifies me more." His hand caught her wrist, not pulling away, but holding her there, her fingers against his skin. "I've done things, terrible things. I'll probably do them again. I know. I can't promise you normal, can't promise you safe. I stopped believing in safe the day I watched my brother die because a hospital was understaffed and overwhelmed and nobody cared enough to try harder." She met his eyes, those black depths that had seemed so empty once, and now held something that looked almost like hope. "But you care. Violently, dangerously, in ways I can't always accept. But you care." "Sophia, I'm not asking you to be someone else. I'm asking you to let me choose this, choose you, with my eyes open." The silence stretched. Outside, she could hear the hospital coming back to life. Announcements over the PA, gurneys rolling, the steady beep of monitors, the sounds of healing, of life continuing despite everything that tried to end it. "I'm dismantling parts of it," he said finally. "The trafficking operations, the protection rackets targeting small businesses. It won't be fast, it won't be clean, but I'm trying to—" He stopped, the words seeming to cost him. "I'm trying to be someone who deserves this, deserves you. You don't have to deserve me. You just have to be honest with me. His hand slid from her wrist to her palm, careful of the healing bruises from the parking garage. Then honestly, I've never been more terrified than when I got the call about the bomb. Never felt more helpless, more human. Good, Sophia said softly. Feeling helpless means you're still capable of feeling, still capable of changing. What if I can't change enough? What if you already have? She pulled his head down, pressed her lips to his forehead just above the cut, tasting copper and salt, and the possibility of something neither of them had believed in for a very long time. When she pulled back, she saw tears tracking down his face. Silent. Unexpected. The kind of tears that come from a place so deep you'd forgotten it existed. We're both wounded, she whispered. But wounded isn't the same as broken. Maybe together we can figure out the difference. His arms came around her then, holding her like she was made of something precious and fragile, like she was the most dangerous thing he'd ever tried to keep safe. And maybe she was. Maybe hope was always the most dangerous thing in a world built on fear. Outside, dawn was breaking over Seoul. Inside, two people who'd lived in darkness for too long stood together in fluorescent light, choosing the terrifying possibility of healing. Choosing, against all logic and nature, to build something neither had thought possible. Sometimes monsters learn to be human. Sometimes nurses who had spent their lives healing others finally learned to heal themselves. And sometimes, against all logic and reason, love really did conquer all. Thank you for following the story to the end. I want to hear from you. What was your favorite part of this story? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because I read every single one, and your reactions mean the world to me. If you love this story, if it made you feel something real, please hit that subscribe button, and don't forget to turn on notifications, so you never miss any of our interesting and heartwarming stories. Case.